A few weeks ago, I made a video about the economic revolution of South Korea, and you guys seem to like it. It has a whopping 57 views at the time of writing this script. Thank you guys so much. Anyway, I call the Korean economic miracle the greatest economic revolution of all time. Unbeknownst to the world, South Korea was about to accomplish what will go down in history as the greatest economic revolution of all time. Well, I might have changed my mind actually, because a few days ago when I was searching for the topic that I will talk about in the next video, I said, what about Vietnam? I honestly did not know anything about Vietnam at that point, except that I see it occasionally mentioned in YouTube videos in the context of the next factory of the world or the economy of the next decade, and I started noticing it more and more in many products like electronics and footwear. So I did what anybody will do to understand a certain country's economy. I looked up the usual numbers, and there was it. Vietnam has a nominal GDP of $511 billion, making it the 34th richest country by nominal GDP, in a GDP per capita of $5,000. Now you might say that Korea is far richer than Vietnam, so what makes the Vietnamese economic revolution greater? Because South Korea is the 15th richest country on earth by nominal GDP, about $2 trillion, in a GDP per capita of $37,000. That is 7 times what Vietnam has. Well, although South Korea is the greater economy by the traditional sense, that is not everything that makes a great economic revolution. And to compare both economies and to determine whose economic revolution is greater, we need to look at what Vietnam endured and where it actually came from. While on my research, I was actually planning to make this video on how the Vietnamese economy works, and where it is hidden, and why everybody is calling it the next China. But things kept guiding me to the historic roots of all of this, and what made me consider that the Vietnamese economic revolution is greater than South Korea's is this book called The Tyranny of Merit by Michael Sandel. The idea of this book is that in life, not everybody starts the race from the same starting line. There is some who got to begin the race way ahead than everybody else because of some advantages that they did not strive to acquire. It made me realize that when people are comparing countries and how great their achievements are, like South Korea and Vietnam, they assume that both nations are in the same race with the same conditions. It is just that Vietnam is much slower. But this is not actually the case. Both countries had so much obstacles and had rose up from very destructive wars, but Vietnam, I really think they got worse. So first, let's go back 170 years ago, September of 1858, when French naval forces attacked what was today's Vietnam. And the reason for that, well, it was your typical "I need to protect Catholic missionaries," the excuse that every imperial power hid behind when they wanted to invade somebody back in the day. The actual reason was that France wanted a Pacific trading base and access to the southern Chinese trading routes. Long story short, in 1887, the French Indochina was formally established. This included what is known today as Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. France classified Vietnam as a colony of economic extraction. Now remember this because it will explain the whole colonial economic experience in Vietnam. France did build ports, roads, and railways, but it was purely to extract Vietnamese resources. They established massive monopolies on necessities like salt and rice, and implemented massive taxes on peasants that did not have anything in the first place. Moreover that, during the period of decolonization, French investors seized close to 500,000 hectares of land. Also in this period between 1880 and 1930, the production of rice actually quadrupled. Its consumption between the Vietnamese fell because almost all of the rice was exported. Vietnam, or perhaps the French colony, became one of the leading rice exporters in the world, while hunger surrounded between its people. Fast forward a little bit, and Germany just defeated France in 1940. Now let me ask you, what is worse than one colonial power occupying your country? Yeah, that's right, 2 colonial powers occupying your country. France was forced to make a deal with the Japanese Empire that was expanding violently at the time. The deal concluded with France allowing Japanese military presence while the French administration continues. Now with the Japanese and the French both extracting Vietnamese resources violently to support their war efforts, combined with heavy floods and unstable food distribution, this directly caused the Great Vietnamese Famine of 1944, which has an estimated death toll of 1 to 2 million people. And in the 9th of March 1945, Japan staged a coup against the French administration and were successful at installing the Vietnamese Empire that they of course severely controlled. But it was not long after that Japan surrendered in World War II, and Ho Chi Minh seized the power vacuum in what is known as the August Revolution. Well, guess who did not like that? France literally came came back after being kicked out and said, bold of you to assume that you can declare independence. And just like that, the First Indochina War began in 1946, a war that will last 8 years until France's will to control Indochina collapsed after they got a humiliating defeat, where Vietnamese forces surrounded and defeated a French garrison of 15,000 men. But here is where things went south again for the Vietnamese. Even though France lost the war and they were forced to the negotiation table, Vietnam still got split because of international Cold War politics. The US even threatened to go into nuclear war if the communists controlled the entirety of Vietnam. But Ho Chi Minh got promised a nationwide election will be held 2 years later, and the Vietnamese Communist Party thought they would reunite Vietnam peacefully. They were very popular and everyone knew that they will win those elections, but the elections were never actually held, and that's what actually caused the Vietnamese War to break out in 1959. As you probably know, the Vietnamese Communist Party ultimately won, but I don't think you can actually call it a victory. This war is one of the most environmentally destructive conflicts in modern history, and the victory came at a really heavy cost to not only Vietnam but to Laos and Cambodia, who were by the way strictly neutral in the war. The death toll across all three nations reached an estimated 1.5 to 3.5 million people, and millions more were wounded or displaced. In this war, the total number of bombs that was dropped on the three nations has exceeded the number of bombs used in Europe in all of World War II. That made Laos the most bombed country per capita in human history. A payload was dropped on Laos every 8 minutes, 24/7 for 9 straight years. All of that because the Vietnamese had a trail of supply running across eastern Laos. Even today, 30% of the 270 million cluster bombs are still killing indigenous people 50 years later after the end of the war. During that war, 74 million liters of toxic chemicals were dropped, contaminating 6.4 million acres of land and turning entire bodies of water completely undrinkable. But even after all of this, Vietnam still got back up from a $95 GDP per capita in the 1980s to $500 billion economy today. Even when they were banned from trading with half of the world, they still were able to pull off a miracle against all odds. They never stopped, not when undetonated bombs are still doing damage to the land and the people, not when over 6 million acres of land became practically useless and they went from having food shortages to becoming one of the largest rice exporters, and from having no industrial base whatsoever to manufacturing half of the world's Samsungs. In that story, how they did it, going from having nothing to becoming one of the fastest growing economies in the last 4 decades. That is exactly what the next video is about. Thank you guys for watching the video. I know it was a bit of a short recap of the 100 years of hell that Vietnam endured. If you want a deeper dive in the topic, feel free to tell me in the comments. A like and subscribe helps the channel more than you know, and see you in the next one.